Życzymy Państwu przyjemnej podróży.
Dzień dobry Państwu, witam na dyskusji Przyszłość globalnego kapitalizmu. And once again, we will hold this discussion in English, so if you need to brace yourself with translation sets, this is the right time to do it. And my and our guests are maybe starting from the far side of the scene. I'm Wojciech Kostrzewa, CEO of Polish Business Council, Brad Lips, CEO of Atlas Network, and Ignacy Morawski, Deputy Chief Editor of Puls Biznesu. My name is Hanna Cichy and I am Head of Business Desk at Polityka Insight, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here. Let me start with a quote from Ursula Le Guin. "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but so did divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings." And I think that this is a good start for the thinking about the future of global capitalism, because sometimes this so obvious things like capitalism or globalization, we take them for granted, and then they started to change, to maybe even diminish, to crumble. And it takes us by surprise. So maybe to kick us off, Brad, what is global capitalism? Do you think capitalism is global, or you can draw some lines either on the map or maybe on some other axis of where the boundaries, the limitations of capitalism today?
Sure, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel and indulging my need to do this in English, so I do appreciate that. And I like this opportunity to sort of define terms at the beginning, so we're all sort of on the same page about what we are talking about when we talk about global capitalism. And I'll be a little bit provocative at the beginning and say that I've never liked the term capitalism as something that describes the system that I devote my career to defending. It's a term that was popularized by Friedrich Engels, the patron and co-author of Marx. And I think it's sort of fundamentally misleading because it lets people think that capitalism is some sort of top-down project to engineer the development of capital, of the distribution of capital. And that's really the way that I think socialists tend to think, a top-down project about how do you produce stuff and distribute stuff. And when I think about capitalism, I think of the system that I love. It really begins with the dignity of each individual and having trust that each person should have the freedom to choose what to do with their talents. So I really think of capitalism as a bottom-up solution for social cooperation. Sometimes I think maybe we should have taken the term socialism and given the socialist capitalism, but I know that's too confusing for our panel. So just to be clear, when I talk about capitalism, I'm talking about a system that really derives from the ideas that Adam Smith popularized in the end of the 1700s, and what I think is really underappreciated by people is that, perhaps the most important thing that happened in history was the change in living standards. We have human history essentially consisting of people living at subsistence level poverty until the 1700s, and it starts in Holland and then England and then the colonies that became the United States. as societies began to function in a way that we would recognize today as capitalism, of permitting people to use their talents to trade and engage as they want. And over the years, that remarkable increase in living standards has indeed gone global, especially over the last 3 or 4 decades, as China has engaged with the global economy, as India has engaged, and billions of people have been lifted out of that subsistence level poverty.
But
And
does
certainly,
China have capitalism? If you think that
well,
capitalism is connected to dignity of a person, individual person, I don't think it's a
you're right that it's certainly not clear cut. So I would say that capitalism is an ideal that it's worth being mindful of and aspiring to. It's the ideal that has helped Poland go from being a relatively poor country at the end of the communist era to one that is relatively rich today. And certainly there are flaws in almost all the societies that we would call capitalist, and there are ones that I would call fundamentally unfree, like China, but that have certainly benefited from adopting aspects of capitalism and turning away from the sort of the communist tradition that had been predominant prior to the 1980s in China. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a framework for where I think the word gets confusing, but why I think it's such an important ideal to keep in mind as we think about the future.
So we covered the capitalism part of our today's topic. Maybe now switch to the global. And maybe I'd ask Wojciech Kostrzewa, do you see, does the business see that we are going to less open economy, less globalized one? Is the big trend, or is it just like some minor bump in the road, and we hit it during the pandemic, and then there was some supply side tensions, and now it went from the business perspective to government perspective. We're talking about more and more bringing so-called strategic branches of production closer to home or to friendly countries. But is it the new trend, or is it just some minor alteration, minor fever that will overcome and go back to very open, very global economy?
You know, I'm macroeconomist by training, and I'm probably the oldest participant in this panel. So I have the privilege to see that the market economy is cyclical. And one of the first lessons in my macroeconomic studies and in the history of European economy was that European and US, enjoyed the first wave of globalization starting mid-19th century, going up to outbreak of the First World War. This was almost 70 or 80 years. The second period of restricted globalization took place after the World War II, restricted because it was restricted to what was by then Western Europe, US, and for a little time the old colonies. And the third experience with globalization, this is the phenomena which started after 89 or 90, which is experience of probably most of the people present here. But it is cyclical as well. It was built on the premise that there are friendly neighbors and friendly countries. This premise is challenged, was challenged first by Russia, then by geopolitical tension between US and China. And we will have to adopt this. There is no other way. We see as business leaders, as a business organization, that there are more and more restrictions, that the buzzwords of today are nearshoring and friendshoring, something which was not known and not used even 10 years ago. And we European, we Poles, we have to do our best in order to be on the winner side.
Okay, but there is no one winner side here. Like there is a production side and there is the consumption side. For example, I have this device here. I brought it a few years ago, and I brought it because it was cheap. And guess what? It's Chinese. And when I bought it, I thought only because, well, it's cheap, it's nice. I'm gonna use it, and I didn't even think back then about the security issues. Right? And today, if I were to buy electronic device, I would think, okay, man, is it safe? It's cheap, but is it safe? But as a customer, I like cheap goods, right? As a production side, maybe not so much. It's a very big topic in car industry right now. So, Ignacy, who will win, the customer or the worker here?
Very, very good question. I mean, I don't think there is a tension today between customers and workers. I see many tensions in the global economy and many cracks, and some of them were mentioned. But the division between consumers and workers is not the strongest one, I think. Maybe I will mention the cracks that I see and divisions, and then we will see whether it fits your your views.
It's not a clear division, but maybe because sometimes we are all customers and workers alike at the same time, but maybe we do prioritize our interest as only one side of our identity, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, the word identity, I think, is more important because where the tension today is, I think it's between community and identity on one side and consumption on the other side, right? So what people want, global citizens today, I think on the one hand, we have a clear tendency to go back to local politics. People need more concentration on community, identity. They want to feel that they are together, which is very difficult on the global scale because you don't have anything like global society, global identity, global community. You can have local communities, national communities, regional communities, but you can't have a global community. So return to community and identity politics is naturally creating cracks and divisions in the global system, right? And I think that people really, this is a genuine need of voters today in developed economies to concentrate more on communities. But on the other hand, a very deep instinct in developed societies is cheap consumption, right? So people are really accustomed to buying cheap and advanced goods, like you mentioned. And those cheap and advanced goods are produced by the global production system, right? So we have clear benefits from being a part of the global economy that we can consume a lot of cheap advanced goods. And I think that those two opposite values or purposes of society might be today in conflict with each other. So the more we need to concentrate on communities and identity politics, the less globalization we have. But the less globalization we have, the more difficult it will be to support mass consumption. On the other hand, if we want to maintain the standard of living, high consumption, low prices, like the easiness of buying goods, like you mentioned, right? That like most citizens today, at least people who live in larger cities, can afford those types of goods that you mentioned. If we want to maintain cheap and mass consumption, we have to maintain the global production system. If the global production system disintegrates, we will not have as high standard of living as today. So to me, this is the major challenge of I would say economic policy today.
And the problem might be that no matter what part of this equation you choose, what value function you concentrate on, identity or standard of living, when you neglect the other one, you risk the rise of radical groups in societies. It was even said yesterday on the main stage. That
Yes.
If we do not find a way to grow, to develop, to increase the standard of living, we do risk more populist at our door.
I just want to add one thing to what Wojciech Kostrzewa said, because you said that we have this divides in the global economy between various political systems. We have, free Western system and more, I would say, authoritarian axis concentrated between China, Russia, maybe Iran, maybe some other countries. So that's one division. But I think what's worrying is that we have more and more divisions within the Western system. So, for example, if you observe the political debate in the United States, they want to increase tariffs not only on Chinese goods, but also on European goods. So there is increasing tendency to stay closed also within the Western, I would say, not only hemisphere, but economic system. And that's I think, a big challenge.
Yeah, Brad, would you like to add something about the American economy closing up? And I think it's rather closing up there than opening up, regardless of the election results, right?
There's definitely been a big threat to what used to be a consensus around the value of trade. I think that I think it would be wrong to project sort of our hyper focus on these economic issues onto sort of where the American people are at large. And I think that one of our big challenges in defending capitalism in general is simply that societies like the one I grew up in the United States, it's kind of like the water that fish float in. We're not aware of what has brought the blessings that are all around us. So I really have sort of a fundamental faith that as long as we're able to maintain sort of the fundamental institutions of liberal democracy, there's going to be policy mistakes and there's going to be policy corrections, and that it would be sort of unnecessary hand-wringing to imagine that there's this this massive reversal that can't be recovered. I think that a lot of the bad economic policies that we stomach are simply because we can afford to, and at some point we're going to learn from it. But I don't think that there's a fundamental disintegration of the global economy that's on the doorstep. I think that there's a lot of political posturing that's worrisome, but as long as there's people that are continuing to advocate for what everybody knows has brought a really fantastic upward trajectory in living standards, that this is a solvable problem.
It's nice to hear an optimistic voice on the stage always. Okay, I forgot to mention we will be taking questions from the audience at the end of our discussion. So please prepare some. And there is, I think, one more dimension of it to cover. It's the how this reverse or step back on the path on globalization, this nearshoring, friendshoring. It is also awakening tensions even within the EU, right? Because we have now the new European industry policy, CHIPS Act and things like that, and what it creates the competition between the European countries for the investment, for the grants, at the beginning of the pandemic, at the beginning of this trend of nearshoring, friendshoring, there was a big discussion how Poland may be a big winner of this trend, but are we? We just lost Intel, right?
Well, but we had lost Intel not because of Poland, but because of
Intel.
big mess Intel has at home. So it would be really unfair to blame Poland, Polish authorities, or Poland as market for this step. By the way, Germany lost Intel too, due to the exactly the same.
But they have Tesla to wipe their tears.
Well, but with all the problems and so on. So I think looking at the statistics, the inflow of foreign direct investment to Poland is growing year by year, and there are no signs that it would stop. There are two theoretical factors which could change this trend. One is demography, which would be not addressed either by massive robotization and automatization of the work process, or by migration. Migration is with question mark, as we know. So something out of these two has to happen. And the second factor which could reverse this positive trend would be a dramatic escalation of the war in Ukraine, which could lead that Poland suddenly would move from being near front country to the almost front country. I do not foresee the second, and I'm optimistic as somebody who has a faith in liberal values and creativity that the first two factors will be addressed correctly. It will get the right blend of migration and right blend of robotization and automatization of the work process.
Oh no, we're too optimistic here on this panel. So let me talk about climate, right? How is climate change and climate policy reshape the economical playing field? Because we talked already about the tensions with China and the things that we buy, the advanced things we buy from China very cheap are not only kind of the toys, but also the solar panels, electric cars, and so on and so on. So these growing tensions risk not only our consumption of basic goods by the end buyer, but also the pace and the price of our climate change.
Well, climate policy is reshaping global capitalism, that is for sure. Why? Because capitalism and grand planning do not go well together. Like capitalism is about, as you said, a bottom-up process, right? A spontaneous process. It's about disintegrated decision-making. Whether climate policy is about grand plan, foreseeing decisions 100 years forward, right? So combining capitalism with climate policy, in my opinion, is challenging. And obviously, you have these two very broad approaches to climate policy. On the one hand, are people who say that it's impossible to combine climate policy reaching zero emissions with capitalism. So these are, I would say, radicals. They say that because of the fact that private capital and free enterprise have limited perspective, like 5 to 10 years into the future, you cannot achieve longer-term goals, and you cannot mobilize capital to reduce emissions using only institutions from the free enterprise system. So this is a radical idea, and I think it's getting more popular globally. On the other hand, you have, I would say, less benign, more benign or more market-friendly approach, which says that we need reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We need to have effective climate policy, but we need to conduct this policy through incentives. So we need to incentivize the private sector so that it changes its behavior in a way that's compatible with climate goals. But whatever the path we choose, in general, I think that there is a tension between capitalism and climate policy. Because as I said, climate policy is a grand plan, grand strategy. Capitalism is about spontaneous system of disintegrated decision-making.
Okay, but capitalism has always existed within some set of rules. You call the climate policy grand planning, but I think we can also look at it as the internalization of externalities, right? The carbon taxing, it is a PIGU tax, right? It's a very, very old, very basic concept in every. If you take any basic economic textbook, you will have these stories about, okay, so there is a factory and it pollutes the river, so we should tax the pollution to incentivize the factory to either change the production or invest in some better technologies and reinvest these gains into the community.
Right, but carbon taxes, I think it's not enough to to lead a successful climate policy.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
So it's like if you look at what happens in the European Union, like you have very detailed grand plan in many sectors of the economy. It's not only a carbon tax, right? So I think that most economists would agree that carbon tax is not enough, because the tax would have to be huge. It would have to be very distortive to work. So that's why you need to supply carbon taxes with innovation subsidies, and when you have innovation subsidies, you have distortion of private market, and so I think that in general, it's climate policy is a distortive policy.
Brad, you look like you agree.
I certainly agree that it's an enormously big challenge for the reasons that you've laid out. And I'll clarify that the work that I get to do has me collaborating with organizations all around the world that are completely independent and struggling with this in different ways. So I wouldn't presume to speak for any of them as we talk about this contentious topic, because my firm belief is that capitalism flourishes when government really limits itself to its core tasks and doesn't intervene in the economy. There are times when there are crises where, yes, there is kind of a natural centralization, and the big question here, I think, is that there's certainly a legitimate threat that needs study and may need some important incorporation into policy. But there's a big Pandora's box. There's a lot of incentives for governments that want to meddle in the economy and want to get in the business of picking winners and punishing enemies, creating losers in the economy. And that's enormously dangerous. And I think that part of what you've put your finger on the pulse of is that it's very tough to know how big this crisis is and whether there is a way to ameliorate it, or if the bigger strategy is to trust that there will be adaptation, that if we continue the trajectory of global capitalism, you're going to have continued innovation that will allow us to produce much more abundant, much cleaner energy, and adapt to actual climate problems as they manifest themselves. I tend to think this is the strategy you can count on more than you can count on politicians to have the right judgment and foresee a really difficult scenario ahead.
Yeah, there's definitely one way of thinking about it, but on the other hand, we've seen people making constantly bad decisions as well. Even a very recent case, the climate change is a natural phenomenon. It is happening, and it is reshaping the world we are living. It is making it, for example, more volatile, more dangerous. And I'm talking about flood that we've seen recently in southwestern part of Poland. And people consistently building houses on the flood high-risk areas, right? And this increasing volatility will also distort the market. And it's another problem you also have in the US, right, with the insurance. If the risk of some volatile climate phenomenon is high enough that you cannot insure your property from this risk, and either people will learn to adapt and mitigate, or they will press their governments to help them and to support them.
Yeah, and maybe what I would just say is that I think if you look at the long trend of number of people that are killed each year or displaced each year from climate events, it has gone down markedly over the past century. I think Alex Hammond quoted a stat that it's more than 90% less today than it was 100 years ago, and that's really because of the fact that countries have become wealthier and can adapt. So I trust there's going to be adaptation that's led by people with skin in the game, figuring out how to take care of their own interests. And I would just caution that some of the I think the worst policy decisions that we've seen in recent years have sometimes been done at the behest of a sort of a climate concern that has left Germany more dependent on Russian energy, and that has had the U.S. shutting off what had been an increasing supply of natural gas and going back to dirtier energies. I think that there's a lot of unintended consequences that we don't always foresee, because we sort of assume that there are people in charge that are acting authentically in the public interest, that they aren't being swayed by enormous political pressures that will come when they get to control an enormous swath of the economy. And we underestimate how much people, normal people in their day-to-day lives, can adapt when they have a clear sense of how to take care of their own interests.
Okay, if they do, and if they foresee in the future, okay. But maybe do you want to add something to the climate, or are we moving forward?
I would like to add to the climate and to your previous comments about my optimism. I'm not only president of a large business organization, but I'm entrepreneur by myself. You cannot be entrepreneur without being optimistic. Otherwise, you should stop to try, because this is always history of success and failure, and you have to believe that failure is only the part of the learning process. But to climate, I think that is long-term phenomena. No doubt human beings are contributing to what we are experiencing just now, but as well, we as citizens and the governments are contributing a lot. Take the example of the floods this year, or back 1997 in southwest Poland. The part of the victims were living in buildings which wouldn't be constructed according to the old plans from the beginning of the century, because these plots were known as being affected by flooding from time to time. Maybe it was not every 25 years, but every 50 years. But our predecessor knew. It will have the consequences for certain industries. I can imagine that there will be a growing demand coming from insurance industry for creation of a kind of state or even EU-supported reinsurer, like we have it in the case of war and terrorist risk. War terrorist risk are not insurable, so the state has to step in. COFAS or MS or Exacom in the case of US, and that maybe this type of reinsurance backed by the public funds will be necessary in order to provide reinsurance coverage against natural disaster. And one final comment: the difference between today and 50 years ago in the insurance industry means that today I'm in the position to identify every single household using maps delivered by some big techs without mentioning the name, which is exposed against the flooding risk or fire risk, and which is not. Which means that you can introduce dynamic pricing, which we knew from airline industry 20 years before, to the level of insurance. And that means that those living in the highly risk area will lose the ability to buy the coverage, because it will be extensively the price will be extensive.
So you mentioned the big techs, and this is the next angle I want to put some light on. The technological progress is a very great thing, and we all agree on it. This is the thing that enables us to increase the standard of living and makes our life safer and more pleasant. But sometimes technological progress creates some more concentration on the business side and can reduce competition. We have, I will name the company, Google. We have a very recent ruling against Google and with possibility that the US government will kind of try to dismantle Google if it's even possible. And how, looking forward, could technological progress reduce competition and reduce the scale of capitalism that we're enjoying? For example, in the use of AI, it's a very big topic that the fruits of AI are not distributed equally, that they create new giants and new dominant forces in the market. Is it a big threat, or is it just another temporary bump in the road because there will always be some new entrants on the market? Yeah.
May I? I think that one of the basic cornerstones of successful capitalism or successful market economy was the early adoption of anti-monopoly ruling. Back in the time when US was ruled by steel and railway barons and some bank barons as well. Because the cornerstone of successful market economy is competition. So I think as long as the governments or the states or multinational organizations like EU can secure the basic level of competition, even in such sectors which are dominated by few global players, as long so long the capitalism or the market economy and the innovation will win. Should we go towards the opposite outcome, then I would start to have a doubt.
No, but that's actually a very interesting point that you raised. Is, for example, is the search engine market competitive or not? To me, it's monopolized, right? So maybe we should break the authorities should break Google and introduce more competition. But on the other hand, Google is also it's both monopolies, but it's also a source of huge innovations. Like if you look at who got the Nobel Prize this year, so there were one of the people who got the Nobel Prize in chemistry for creating a mechanism to project the structure of proteins were people from a company financed by Google, right? So Google is investing huge amounts of money into innovation. And if we remember Joseph Schumpeter, the great economist and thinker, he was a huge defender of capitalism, but he was also very much against antitrust policy, because his view was that companies always even if they accumulate power, market power, they will invest those money into some new products, progress, etc. Right? So that's an interesting question. I don't have any clear answer whether companies like Google are destroying economy because they are monopolists, or are they pushing us forward because they invest those huge amounts of money into innovation. But the one point that I can be hopeful about capitalism and technology, because obviously there are threats, but also opportunities. One opportunity I see is that, in the world dominated by digital technologies, when we all live in a digital world, maybe our mind is connected to some grand computer, the role of physical capital will diminish. And the role of human capital will increase. And physical capital has a tendency to concentrate. Right? If you look at who owns the assets in the global economy, it's mostly very large enterprises, companies, and the richest people. They own the physical assets, right? The means of production, factories, cars, etc. But human capital is much more dispersed, right? So if we move into economy based more on human capital, in which it is easier to copy, easier to create, you know, some own means of production, maybe the capitalist system will be much more equal and competitive and dispersed. That's like maybe a futurist vision, but that's my optimist point about the future. I also have many pessimistic views, but maybe I will let others speak.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to maybe sound a cautionary note that I am not doctrinaire antitrust law, but I really think that it's best exercised when there's actually consumer harm that's the motivating factor. I think throughout my lifetime, there's been a succession of concerns that, you know, IBM is too powerful and that Microsoft is too powerful and Facebook is too powerful, and in each case there's always been a new entrant. So I think it's a mistake to react in the short term and to sort of trust that our government overlords have the consumer's interest at heart. I think that sometimes there's sort of a spirit of malevolence against success that is really undermining to capitalism. So I don't want to diminish concerns about entities that grow too large, especially when some of those companies are at times in league with government. I think there's legitimate concerns that have been expressed in the U.S. about a censorship agenda that was sort of the work of people within the U.S. government and tech companies that did their bidding. I think that those are some really interesting and troublesome questions there. But I think there's also sort of a knee-jerk reaction that often has us empowering politicians to break up things that are too big, and somehow trusting that those politicians are actually wise economic decision makers. And I think that's giving them maybe too much faith.
Ignacy mentioned the physical capital versus human capital, but there is another mean of production in today's economy. It's data. And does this data belong to us? Does the data belong to no one at all, or to the tech giants? You know, the lines are quite blurry. And you also mentioned the Nobel Prizes, and maybe we should also circle back to the so-called Nobel Prize. It's not a Nobel Prize per se in economy, and it was given in the area of institutional economy, and maybe now we should now talk very briefly about the capitalism and its synergies it might create with liberal, open or inclusive, in the words of the Nobel Prize laureates, institutions like civil society, like free media, like NGOs. Or are there more synergies today, or are there more threats from the capitalism to these institutions, or from these institutions to the capitalism? We don't have enough inclusive institutions, and it threatens our capitalism. What's your point?
Well, from my own experience at Polish Business Roundtable and from Polish experience, I think the business community in Poland was on the forefront to protect free media, as we experienced the tensions in the last or in the years which finish end of 2023. And the community as such was courageous enough to voice the concern. We mentioned many times that free media is like the second link of the free market society or free society. We need free market and we need free media. We are those who were on the forefront to get involved into cooperation with NGOs in order to increase the turnout rate in the last elections. And I think that many of NGOs, maybe being present even here, experience that we are cooperating with them, changing the model of cooperation, not from the traditional donor and beneficent to partnership because we see NGOs as complementary organization to us. We have to focus towards business. We have to focus towards our sometimes short-term or medium-term goals, but NGOs can complement us very well when they can change or be agent of changes in the social life in the society or in the questions of environment.
Yeah, I really see capitalism as being sort of 100% integrated with liberal institutions, the rule of law, freedom of speech, and these basic principles. To me, you're working for the same thing. And maybe the only place where I see a threat is in this sense that sometimes free enterprise produces so many blessings that we begin to take for granted that we sort of lose sight of how important these institutions are. And it enables people to sort of exploit the trust that's been built up, the political capital that's been built up. And I think that that's part of the story of the times we're living through. The work that I feel real privileged to be involved in is working with NGOs, with public policy think tanks, and their entire mission is to affect public policy in the direction of economic and political liberties, and to help people understand why that's worth fighting for, why that's worth working for. At Atlas Network, we take a lot of inspiration from a phrase that came from Poland almost 200 years ago. This idea that you can fight for your for your own freedom, but also to yours. I guess I'm botching the phrase, for our freedom and yours. I think is a really inspiring thing for us to take home. That it's not a selfish pursuit when we're thinking about our rights as individuals in free societies. It's something that's universal, and that we really show our mettle when we're working for the freedom of all people.
Well, I think that the relationship between capitalism and liberal democracy is like marriage. Most marriages, it's complex enterprise. So capitalism is, I think, in tension with democracy. If you take liberal democracy, capitalism is a bit in tension with democracy, because entrepreneurs and people who own capital, capital, like physical capital, they are in minority always, right? They are minority. So they struggle in a system where you have majority voting. But capitalism really like this liberal part of liberal democracy, because liberal part is about protecting minorities, about providing certain rights, like ownership rights, freedom of speech. So I think it's never a full friendship and love between capitalism and liberal democracy. It's really a relationship that goes through ups and downs. And I think that today we see some downs.
Okay, so we have less than 15 minutes left. Do we have any voices from the public? I would like to open the discussion now. It's a problem because I hardly see you. Yeah, here's. Wait. There will be a microphone.
Hello, my name is Erika Jura. I have a question because you talked about changes in environment and its influence on economy. But I would like to ask about violating human rights in context of economy, because I heard here that to maintain our possibility to access some goods, we need global capitalism, right? And I'm thinking if it's possible to keep global capitalism and accessibility to cheap things we can get, and our standard of life is better because of that, without violating human rights, because as we know, countries that produce the most, and what we said here, we have things from China. We all know that it's not always fair trade to the people that produce it. And also, I heard one of you speak today about the trend of people looking for products more locally, and the government has idea to produce more locally, also because of COVID situation. But I also see as a consumer that they're also looking for it because they are more aware of the production and the costs of cheap production. So they are trying to buy stuff from places they are more aware how it was made. So my question is, do you think this trend that you talk about will, in the context of human rights and the production, will somehow in future change the global economy? Would it be strong enough to make an impact? And if there is a possibility to have this global capitalism without violating human rights?
Maybe before you start answering, do we have more questions? Maybe we can get to maybe 3 and start answering them here in the middle.
Hello, my name is Jan Fazlagic. I have a question to Mr. Brad Lips. What is your take on the, I think, very hot topic in recent months in the United States about wokeism and woke culture? Do you think it is supporting the growth of global capitalism, or is it like a hurdle on its way? Thank you.
And do we have one more maybe? Yeah, two by so far. So maybe, yeah, there's third one, yeah. I don't see. Huh? Okay, if you're not shouting loud enough, it's okay. Maybe let's start and maybe if we have time, we'll get one more round.
Can I start?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but keep it
Sure.
keep it brief. Okay?
I'll keep it brief. Yeah, well, I think that you're very right to kind of point out that the woke the culture wars over wokeism is playing out as sort of a central part of the political campaign this season, and is sort of at the heart of a lot of the political tensions in the U.S. And I certainly think that there's an element of that has crossed the line into infringement of free speech and really being destructive to the social fabric. So I think it's a really interesting, pressing issue that deserves debate, although it does seem to kind of overwhelm a lot of the political conversation in a way that may be a little bit disproportionate. But I think it also kind of ties into the way that I'd like to answer that really thoughtful first question as well, that brings up the human rights problems. I think that when you look at the long trajectory of what global capitalism has done, I would maybe take an opposite view and just say that it was the most advanced economy in England that helped eliminate the slave trade. That capitalism has brought dignity to billions of workers that didn't have it in the past, that it's helped to start to undo systems of caste in India that have lasted for generations but are being transformed by economic opportunity. But there are continuing violations of that. The exploitation of the Uyghur population in China is a tragedy, and something that really is at the core of the kind of work that the organizations that I collaborate with are caring about, because human rights and individual dignity is really as I said at the beginning, is the starting point of why we like free societies, why we believe in the capitalist model of economic freedom that extends from it. So I think it's an important topic to address. I don't think that it's one that poisons the whole conversation about economic freedom, because I think actually economic freedom is a source of dignity and liberation for regular people, including those who have been on the margins of society in the past.
But I think that it is up to you as consumer and voters to keep the pressure on governments, on regulators, and on the companies and entrepreneurs that what you want is the fulfillment of commitment that human rights are respected in all the countries we are buying our raw products or semi-products, and that you are under certain circumstances ready to pay a higher price because there are always costs attached to it, and B, that you behave as during the election campaign and voting act accordingly, that you vote for those who promise to introduce certain regulations.
Do you want to add something?
A very good question about human rights, but I think that the global cheap production system is not dependent on cheap labor and infringement of human rights, right? So it's not incompatible to keep globalization going and fight human rights infringements. I can give you an example. If you take two bakeries, like in a city like Łódź, one is an artisan bakery, a small one, they have 1 point, and then you have like bakery chains where you can buy, bread in many places. So probably bread is much more expensive in the smaller company, artisan bakery. Why? Because they don't have the effects of scale, right? They produce small amounts, but they still have to pay some fixed costs. So they produce more expensive products. So actually globalization and mass production is about effects of scale. If you produce on the global scale, then you produce cheaper. If you divide production into the boxes, into countries only, into small places, limited markets, then you have more expensive production. And so my point is that the effective and cheap production is not based on cheap labor, or at least not only on cheap labor. It's based on effects of scale.
With 4 more minutes, do we have anyone else? Yeah, here on the steps.
Hello, my name is Zora Jaurova. I come from Slovakia. It seems from this debate that there is a general consensus that capitalism is in full line with human rights, freedom, open society, which is interesting because I think it's very Central and Eastern European consensus. You won't find that consensus that much in Western Europe, for example. But one of you said that basically the capitalism shouldn't be interfered by the government unless there is a crisis. However, when you look at the history of capitalism, isn't it that feature we call crisis the very integral feature of capitalism itself? Because there was always some crisis. And isn't that crisis basically the fundamental issue with capitalism, that it's based on the necessity of constant growth, which then interfere with human rights, with environment, with all these other areas we've been debating it here. So how do you see this? Thank you.
It was your words, Brad, so maybe start from you and
Yeah, I guess I see it very differently. I don't think that constant crisis is a feature of capitalism. I think that the ideal of capitalism is free people working out their problems voluntarily with one another, and that people like Joseph Schumpeter have pointed out that entails creative destruction, that there are businesses that are going to be supplanted by others. So there's always churn in the economy, but that tends to be isolated. Some of the times when I think we've seen economic crises, it's really because there is government policy that's incentivized irresponsible behavior. And that, I think, it's wrong to then think, oh, the answer is to have government have more power to influence economic decisions, because invariably that's sort of putting more power in the hands of the people that have centralized power and tend not to exercise it judiciously all the time. So at the end of the day, I really think that capitalism properly understood is a system to decentralize power and to limit the ability of any one person to cause a crisis. That the more we centralize power within society, and that tends to happen with government taking a larger role within the economy, I think that that's when you're actually increasing risk of something catastrophic that then affects everyone.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, so I'll just mention that the government is an institution as well, so maybe not about too much of government, but better or worse also this institution and the competition between different institutions in the society and in the economy as well. So I think that with the rather optimistic, but not without question marks view on the future of global capitalism, global capitalism, we will leave you and leave you to enjoy the rest of the Freedom Games. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Radość, nadzieja, życie, wyzwanie, pasja, pamięć, zaufanie, pokój, jedność. Słowa tworzą świat. Polskie Radio. Źródło wiarygodnych informacji.
Uwielbiam szycie w sieci. Wczoraj podszyłem się pod wnuczka, wieczorem uszyłem intrygę na apce randkowej, a dziś planuję grubymi nićmi szyte oszustwo z promocją. Tak się szyje.
Na oszustów są sposoby. Zapoznaj się z poradami ekspertów na niedajsiepodszyć.pl.
Dziś Nowy Jork, jutro Londyn. Za chwilę Paryż, Warszawa, Berlin. Na całym świecie kultura pulsuje rytmem. Wystarczy tylko włączyć dwójkę. Dwójka, Polskie Radio. Jesteś na miejscu.
Jedzą kanapki z kawiorem.
Nadzwyczajna kasa.
Obrażanie dziennikarzy telewizji polskiej.
Chodzi o działania polityczne.
Przygotowanie ofiar dla pedofilów.
Für Deutschland!
TVP Info. Włącz się na nowo.
Rodzina spółek Pelion to 12 tysięcy osób pracujących w ponad 300 spółkach w Polsce, Szwecji, Wielkiej Brytanii i na Litwie. Jesteśmy liderem w branży ochrony zdrowia. Od 1990 roku dbamy o długość i jakość życia. Pracować z nami możesz w jednym z 7 obszarów.
Polskie Radio.
Jedynka.
Plany biznesowe powstają z marzeń. Dlatego nie ma dwóch takich samych firm. Jedni chcą działać na całym świecie. Innym cały świat mieści się w dłoni. Sukces biznesu to nie tylko jego wielkość, ale też szczęście, jakie przynosi ludziom. PKO Bank Polski.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise